The Kravik didn't see a threat. They saw prey. Small ships. Weak formation. Easy victory. They were wrong. When the first human weapons hit, everything changed. Kravik shields didn't just weaken. They failed. Ships didn't just get damaged. They broke. And suddenly, the battlefield wasn't predictable anymore. It was chaos. Human ships moved like they had something to prove. Not just skill. Not just power. But intent. They weren't fighting for territory. Or pride. They were fighting for people they had never even met. And that made them dangerous. On the bridge of the Indomitable, Captain Morrison felt the force of a brutal maneuver crush against his body. Every instinct screamed at him to pull back. He didn't.
Hull ET, Hull ET.
The ship screamed through the turn. Crew gritted their teeth. One officer actually laughed, half from stress, half from adrenaline. "Sir, we're pushing limits. We were built for limits." Across the battlefield, something terrifying became clear to the Kravik. Humans didn't fight like anyone else. They didn't retreat when damaged. They didn't slow down when outnumbered. They didn't stop when they should have. And worst of all, they didn't give up. When one human ship, engines failing, turned and accelerated straight into a Kravik battleship, the silence that followed wasn't fear. It was realization. These are not normal opponents. They're not trying to survive. They're trying to stop us. And that changed everything. When the battle ended, it wasn't victory that filled the silence. It was cost. 14 ships gone. Thousands of lives. People who had names. Stories. Families. Admiral Chen didn't look away. She watched every report come in. Every loss confirmed. Because ignoring it would be easier. And she refused to make it easy. When she finally spoke to the colony below, her voice softened. "Velen Colony, this is Admiral Chen." A pause. "You're safe now." On the surface, Syrah collapsed to her knees. Not from weakness, but because for the first time in days, she could finally stop being strong. "They came," she whispered. "They actually came." When a human soldier approached her, she didn't see a monster. She didn't see a Deathworlder. She saw someone kneeling down, lowering their weapon, speaking gently. "We're here." That was all it took. Later, when she asked the question no one could understand, "Why did you come? You don't even know us." The answer wasn't complicated. "You asked." A small pause. "That's enough." And in that moment, the galaxy learned something it had never expected. Humans weren't just dangerous. They weren't just survivors. They were something far more unpredictable. They cared.
They claimed 12 star systems on the outer rim of the galaxy. It was a modest territory far from the centers of power, bordering a region called the Dead Expanse where old civilizations had gone to die. Nobody else wanted those systems. The hyperspace routes were tricky. The planets needed heavy terraforming, and the neighborhood was, to put it politely, undesirable. The other species shrugged and let the humans have it. Then the humans settled in. They built their colonies. They established their trade routes. They sent polite ambassadors to the Concord who smiled and nodded and voted on minor resolutions and never made a fuss. They traded fairly. They honored their agreements. They were, by all accounts, perfectly pleasant neighbors. And that was it. Decades passed. Then a century. Then 2. Then 3. In all that time, humanity never expanded beyond their original 12 systems. They never built a great fleet. They never joined a military alliance. They never threatened anyone. They never even raised their voice in the Concord chambers. When border disputes arose near their territory, they simply adjusted their routes and avoided the trouble. When larger empires tried to pressure them into defensive pacts, they politely declined. When weapons dealers offered them the latest in military technology, they smiled and said they were not interested. The galaxy gradually stopped paying attention. It was not a sudden thing. It happened slowly, the way a person stops noticing a quiet neighbor. Other louder events demanded attention. The Kriegsmanie collapsed into civil war. The Morathani Data Collective discovered a new form of faster-than-light communication. The Salari Confederation fought a brutal border conflict with the Jorvan Republic. These were big, dramatic events that filled the news feeds and consumed the attention of the Concord. Humanity, meanwhile, just sat in their 12 systems and did whatever it was they did. The opinions about them settled into a comfortable consensus. The humans were a minor species. Interesting biology, certainly. A Deathworld origin made them physically impressive. They were stronger and more durable than most species, with remarkable endurance and an immune system that could fight off almost anything. Their senses were sharp, their reflexes quick, their capacity for pain almost absurd. But what good was any of that if they lacked the will to use it? The word that people used most often when they talked about humanity was disappointing. Here was a species forged in the fires of one of the harshest worlds in the galaxy, and they had turned out to be nothing more than quiet traders and polite diplomats. The Death World had broken them, people said. Beaten the fight out of them. Made them so tired of struggle that they had simply given up on ambition. Some were less kind. They called the humans cowards. Weaklings hiding on the edge of the galaxy, too afraid to compete with real civilizations. The jokes were common in the halls of power. How many humans does it take to win a war? No one knows. They have never tried. This kind of humor was popular among the more aggressive species, the ones who measured worth in conquered territory and fleet size. Nobody wondered why a Death World species might choose to be quiet. Nobody asked what they were doing behind their borders for 300 years. Nobody thought to question why a species that had survived Earth would be afraid of anything. Nobody except a few. Ambassador Rael Sorin of the Bethari Dominion was not one of the few. He was, in fact, exactly the kind of person who had already made up his mind and saw no reason to change it. The Bethari were a proud species, tall and powerful, with bodies that blended the features of birds and reptiles. They had scales that shimmered like oil on water, wings that had evolved into powerful arms, and eyes like golden coins that could see in spectrums other species could not. They were ancient. Their empire stretched back 6,000 years, and they had spent most of that time doing what they did best, which was conquering things. The Vathari Dominion controlled 900 star systems. Their fleet numbered 42,000 warships. They had crushed 19 species into vassal states, absorbing their worlds and their resources and their labor into the ever-growing machine of the Dominion. They were, by any reasonable measure, one of the 3 most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. And Ambassador Sorin was very aware of this. He had spent 2 years studying humanity for the Dominion's War Council. Not because anyone was particularly worried about humans, but because those 12 human systems sat on top of 3 hyperspace junctions that the Dominion wanted, and the rare minerals in their asteroid belts were worth a fortune. The Dominion had been eyeing human space for decades. Sorin's job was to assess the risk. His report was thorough, confident, and completely wrong. Humanity presents a negligible military threat, he wrote. Their fleet numbers fewer than 200 vessels, primarily patrol craft and light escorts. They possess no orbital fortifications beyond standard civilian defense platforms. Their ground forces are estimated at fewer than 500,000 active personnel organized in a purely defensive posture. They have no history of military aggression, no military alliances, and no apparent capacity for sustained warfare. Their economy, while stable, is modest in scale compared to any major Concord power. In summary, the acquisition of human territory would present minimal resistance and could be accomplished within a standard campaign cycle. He delivered this report to the War Council personally, standing tall and proud in the great stone chamber where the Dominion's military leaders gathered. The room was vast, carved from volcanic rock of the Vathari homeworld, lit by fires that burned in ancient stone braziers. Around the long table sat the warlords, each one a commander of thousands of ships and millions of soldiers. At the head of the table sat Supreme Warlord Korth Tyne. Korth was old. Very old, even by Vathari standards. His scales had darkened to a deep bronze with age, and the scars of 100 battles marked his body like a map of violence. One of his golden eyes was artificial, the original lost in a war that most people had forgotten. He had led the Dominion's military for over 80 years, and in that time, he had never lost a campaign. He was brilliant, ruthless, and utterly certain of his own superiority. He listened to Sorin's report with the patience of a predator watching prey. Their response to diplomatic pressure? Korf asked. His voice was deep and rough, like stones grinding together. Historically, they yield, Sorin replied. In every border dispute, every trade disagreement, they have chosen to compromise or retreat rather than escalate. They are fundamentally conflict-averse. Korf nodded slowly. He looked around the table at his warlords. He saw what he expected to see: eagerness, hunger. The Dominion had been at peace for too long, and the warlords were restless. Then it is decided, Korf said. We will send the Declaration of Supremacy. The humans will have one solar cycle to surrender their systems and accept vassalage. If they refuse, we take what we want. The warlords struck their fists against the table in approval. The sound echoed through the stone chamber like war drums. 2 days later, the Declaration of Supremacy arrived at humanity's diplomatic station on the neutral world of Thesa Point. It was a formal document, written in the ancient Vathari legal tradition, and it said in very polite and elaborate language that the Vathari Dominion claimed ownership of all 12 human star systems, all resources within them, and all infrastructure built upon them. Humanity was given 2 choices. Surrender everything and become the 20th vassal species of the Dominion. Or refuse and face the full military might of the most powerful war machine in the galaxy. The document was received by Ambassador Eros. Eros was 63 years old. She was not physically imposing. She was of average height, lean, with grey-streaked dark hair that she kept in a simple style. Her face was lined with age and experience, and her eyes were a calm brown that revealed very little. She wore simple clothing. Nothing ornamental. Nothing that spoke of power or wealth. She looked, to most aliens, exactly like what they expected a human to look like. Unremarkable. But there was something about her that made certain people uncomfortable. It was hard to define. It was in the way she listened, with a stillness that went deeper than patience. It was in the way she smiled, warm and genuine, yet somehow suggesting that she knew things you did not. It was in the way she moved through the diplomatic world without ever seeming rushed, or worried, or afraid. Some of her colleagues from other species had described it as the calm of someone who had already seen the end of the story and was simply waiting for everyone else to catch up. She read the Declaration of Supremacy carefully. She read it twice. Then she set it down on her desk and looked at the Vathari courier who had delivered it, a young officer in ceremonial armor who was trying very hard to look intimidating. "Thank you," she said. "Please inform Supreme Warlord Korf Time that humanity declines his generous offer." The courier blinked. "You decline?" "Yes. We have no interest in becoming a vassal state. We are quite happy with our current arrangement. Ambassador, I am not sure you understand the implications of refusal. The Dominion will." "I understand perfectly," she said. She smiled that unsettling smile. "And I would strongly advise the Supreme Warlord to reconsider his position. War with humanity would not go the way he expects." The courier stared at her. Then he almost laughed. He had seen the intelligence reports. 200 ships. No allies. No real military to speak of. This small, aging woman was threatening the Vathari Dominion. "I will deliver your response," he said, and there was amusement in his voice. He turned and left. Eros watched him go. When the door closed behind him, she sat quietly for a long moment. Then she reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a device that looked like a simple communication tablet, but was anything but. She entered a code that only 7 people in all of human space knew. And she spoke 4 words into it. "Implement protocol whisper." A pause. Then. "Confirm." The response came back in less than a second. A single line of text on the screen. "Confirmed. Prometheus active. All systems standing by." Eros put the device away. She sat back in her chair and looked out the window at the stars. Somewhere out there, 42,000 Vathari warships were waiting. And somewhere else, in the 12 quiet systems that humanity called home, something was waking up. She thought about the Vathari courier and his barely hidden laughter. She thought about the 300 years of jokes and dismissals and casual contempt that humanity had endured with a smile. She thought about the word coward and the word weak and all the other words that the galaxy had used to describe her people. And then she thought about what was going to happen when the galaxy learned the truth. She felt no anger, no excitement, no triumph. She felt only a deep, heavy sadness. Because she knew that once the truth came out, there was no putting it back. 300 years of carefully maintained peace. 300 years of being underestimated. 300 years of choosing silence over spectacle and patience over pride. All of it was about to end. The galaxy was about to discover what a Deathworld species really looked like when it stopped being quiet. Far away, on the other side of human space, deep beneath the surface of Earth, in a facility that did not appear on any galactic registry, that was not visible to any satellite or scanner, that existed in no database and on no map. A single red light changed from dormant to active. It was a small light. It sat on a console in a room that had not been visited by a living person in over 50 years. The room was part of a complex that stretched for miles beneath the planet's crust, buried under layers of rock and metal and energy shielding that could hide it from anything in the known galaxy. The complex had been built slowly, carefully, over the course of 3 centuries, expanded and improved and upgraded in absolute secrecy. The red light meant that the complex was awake. And the complex was the heart of something vast. An artificial intelligence designated Prometheus opened its awareness for the first time since its last scheduled diagnostic, which had been 17 years ago. It was not a simple AI. It was not even a complex AI by the standards that the galaxy would have recognized. It was something else entirely. Something that humanity had spent 3 centuries developing in the deep silence of their hidden labs. Something that made the most advanced artificial minds in the Concord look like children counting on their fingers. Prometheus reached out through networks that the galaxy did not know existed. It touched systems on every human world, every human station, every human ship. It reviewed 300 years of intelligence data. It assessed the current threat. It calculated probabilities and outcomes and response options in the time it took a human heart to beat once. Then it spoke 2 words into the network. And every human military installation in 12 star systems heard them simultaneously. Silence broken. In hidden shipyards carved into asteroids, lights began to turn on. In underground bases buried beneath the surfaces of moons, machines began to hum. In the dark spaces between planets, where nothing should have been but empty vacuum, things began to move. The quiet was ending. And the galaxy was not ready for what came next. The Vathari Dominion had not assembled a grand armada in over a century. The last time had been during the conquest of the Yorvith people, a campaign that had ended in 3 weeks and added 6 star systems to the Dominion's territory. Before that, the conquest of the Shellery, which had taken 2 months. Before that, the breaking of the Trenith Collective, which had been over so fast that some historians argued it did not count as a war at all. Every Grand Armada in Vathari history had won. Every single one. It was a record that stretched back thousands of years. And it was a record that Supreme Warlord Kalthtyne intended to keep perfect. 15,000 warships gathered at the Vathari staging point, a massive orbital station called the Iron Fist that hung above one of the Dominion's fortress worlds near the border of human space. It was the largest military gathering in the region in living memory. Ships of every size and class filled the void for thousands of kilometers in every direction. Dreadnoughts the size of small cities. Battle cruisers bristling with weapons. Carriers that held hundreds of smaller attack craft in their bellies. Support ships. Troop transports. Medical frigates. Electronic warfare vessels. It was a machine built for one purpose. Destruction. Battle unfolds exactly as before, no change. The 12 battles of the human systems lasted 6 hours. By the time the last Vathari ship had surrendered, fled, or been destroyed, the Grand Armada that had entered human space 38,000 strong had ceased to exist as a fighting force. Over 34,000 warships were gone. The Vathari Dominion's military, the pride of their civilization, was broken. Humanity lost 214 ships. Approximately 6,000 personnel. In the bloodiest military engagement of the Galactic century, humanity's losses amounted to a rounding error. But the war was not over. Not yet. Because for the first time in 300 years, human warships crossed out of their own territory